Darren Korb, the musical composer for the game Hades, and the voice of Zagreus and Skelly. Thank you so much for being a guest in the Academy of Esports podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
You don't sound like Zagreus.
No.
I'm not going to ask you to do it. I'm not going to ask you to do it.
Regular speaking voice, no.
Well, and again, as Darren and I were kind of chit-chatting before and we emailed, it was so funny to find out that you and I are basically Barry contemporaries. I mean, I'm a little older. I'm only a few years older than you, but we grew up about 30 miles from each other. Yeah. He was down. Darren, you're from the San Jose area, and in fact, you went to the same high school that all three of my uncles went to, Bellarmine High School.
Oh yeah.
I almost went to Sarah, which is the rival school, just up the road in San Mateo. But it's just so funny to you think like, oh, this amazing game, and then I just reached out to your company. I was like, I would really like to interview Darren Korb, and and you emailed me back. You're like, sure, let's do this. So. I'm talking a lot because I'm fanboying a little bit. Darren, as we were talking about the game Hades here, I don't even know how to start. I mean, this game is so awesome. How does one start even the process? Well, before we even get into the process of how you made the music, first off, how did you even come to being in this industry of composing music? Because this is your third game, I believe, that you've
fourth game.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is a little bit of the pathway that got you to where you are today? Is amazing success.
I kind of have a weird path into the industry. It wasn't something that I knew was a career path even before I started doing it. I was interested in music and recording and songwriting and producing, or music production and stuff, and that was sort of my main focus before starting working on games, though I grew up playing and loving games and enjoying music for games and thinking about games a lot. And I was, at the time I got involved, just before I got involved with Bastion, I was living in New York I just finished, I went to NYU and I studied sort of a individualized major with a combination of music production and music business with a little bit of humanities and poetry and all that stuff thrown in there. And I was just trying to do anything I could in music, any sort of gig that I could get. I was interning in a recording studio. I was writing songs, and I wrote a musical with my brother. I did a couple of little tiny spots for an infomercial one time, and I wrote a song for an independent movie, but that was it. That was basically all my composing experience before my buddy Amir Rao, who I grew up with. Straight out of college, he went to work at EA LA on the Command and Conquer series, and as a designer, and I was so thrilled for him and was sort of vicariously living the dream through him of like, wow, you're working games, that's so amazing. And a few years later, he decided to kind of strike out on his own with a couple of people from EA and co-found Supergiant and began work on Bastion. And at that time, he just kind of asked me to do it, to do all the audio for this game he was working on, because he thought I could do it, not because I had any experience or qualifications or anything.
So literally, it's just the buddy who goes, I know you. You could do this for me.
Yeah.
So it's having somebody else who believed in you to really kind of get on the horse, if you will.
Absolutely. And that was it. And I've never, that's what I've done ever since. He since he asked me to do that. Yeah.
And Pyre was the first game, right?
So Bastion was first, then Transistor, then Pyre, and then
okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, to create music, it's not like it's good to have, I guess, a story to kind of build around. But, how much of the game do you, as the musical composer, need to know about it? Think about like a John Williams who has to. I assume John Williams got to see all the Star Wars movies well before, they were created and composed. The very memorable musical scores for all these amazing movies he's done. How did you work with a team to develop? Let's start with Bastion. Okay. Sure. Your first time out, was it like, okay, here's the game and now I'm going to make the music, or was it like a hand in hand kind of process?
It definitely was more happening in tandem. I had access to the project from the very early stages, and every subsequent project I've been involved from the beginning, playing prototypes, talking about sort of high level ideas for what the tone of the project is going to be and how we would like the music or the tone of the game to feel as a whole, and what kind of aesthetic we're going for. And that's straight away the first kinds of conversations that we have. And usually what will happen at the beginning of a project is I'm sort of prototyping musical ideas while the game is being prototyped. And then, we just start throwing the music into the game and seeing how it feels. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the way it works. I mean, it's pretty different, I think, from scoring for film or something, which is just to picture. You mm-hmm. have a locked, done thing that you get sent. It's all time locked. The editing's done. you score it exactly to what you're seeing, and it's a pretty different process, I think, that I go through.
And do you look back on, like, say, Bastion being your first game and now Hades, of course, do you look back and go, oh my gosh, what was I doing back then with that first one? And again, kind of learned along the way some tips or tricks or, new technologies that made your process maybe a little easier or kind of enlightened you a little more as you look back on these things?
It's interesting because I certainly am able to, like, I have a lot more experience and understanding of how to implement some of this stuff now, and a better understanding of how everything works. But I tend not to look at stuff I've done previously through that lens of like, oh, I wish I had done all these things, because, part of, I think, something that is baked into the culture at Supergiant is embracing the constraints that we have and working within those and kind of leaning into them and using them to the best of our ability, right? And so the constraint for, on Bastion, for example, the way the audio was all integrated into the game was through this free middleware that was not powerful and did not have a lot of capabilities, and we just all sort of that was the constraint, and it could do what it could do, and the music was composed accordingly, and once we had more options for how to implement the music and implement the audio, I expanded and tried to branch out in terms of my understanding of how to do that stuff and what we were able to actually integrate into the game. So I think it's a process, and I'm pleased with how those games turned out. When I go back and play Bastion now, sure, I mean, I think the mix could be better, and I think there could be some this and that, but it's not like, it's not. I don't have a desire to go and do that now. I think I'm happy with how it turned out, and
Well, I guess it's more to help students through this growth mindset idea, right? Of you're here now, and we always want kids to, especially kids in our program, we want them to just take a chance. We want them to experiment, to grow, and not just feel like I have to have it perfect. I tell people the first episode of this podcast that I ever did, it looked like a hostage video where I had like a camera, it felt like it was about 6 inches from my face, and I had this dead eye stare of just so serious looking in the camera. But it's good that you also take it and you go, I'm proud of that. It sounds like you're very proud of that work, obviously, that you can still enjoy it, even though, like you hear the couple of things that maybe you go, oh, there was that one, thing maybe that was missed. I also have a musical background, not to the level you were, but, being in a marching band in middle school and high school and college, and I'll hear recordings and you hear parts and you just go, oh, I know where this mistake, I heard this note that's off. And I don't know if you feel the same way about yours, but what kind of, I guess, speaking to that experience, what were the things that kind of prepared you maybe in high school or college to be in the role that you are right now? Like, what was the musical instrument you played in high school, or did you play a musical instrument? Yeah. Were you part of the band?
So I wasn't part of the band. I was a rocker. I played in rock bands, and I started playing guitar when I was around 11 and writing songs and playing in bands. And I picked up the bass and the drums. And so I'm sort of like all of the sort of rock instruments are what I play, and I sing. I've been singing since I was a kid and doing musical theater and stuff all from when I was about 5 until all the way through high school, pretty much. So I have, I have a musical background, but it's not, I do not have a traditional composer's background. I'm not much of a keyboard player. I don't really read music. I mean, I can read music a little bit, but not great, and so my background, my sort of songwriting, rock instrument playing and recording are the tools that I use to compose. And then of course, I've picked up some skills along the way, and I can, play enough keys to input MIDI and do, and I can, I'm always trying to sort of improve my understanding of, shore up my weaknesses and expand my comfort zone and, do things that are sort of outside of what I can currently do. It's not creatively exciting unless it's like a little bit scary, so I love that.
I love that.
I always try to just go a little bit further outside of where I'm fully comfortable each time. So, it's speaking to the growth mindset thing too. I'm really, something that it took me a long time to internalize was trying to not be so precious about the material that you're working on. Not every lyric has to be exactly perfect when you think of it. You just write it, you just get it, you do it, you put it down, you get it out, and then you can tweak it later if you decide to. But a lot of times what happens is you come back to and you're like, oh yeah, that's good, I like that. You're critical of yourself while you're doing it, but then, so I think it's really important to sort of learn to trust your creative instincts. And that's something that it took me a while to internalize. And it's, it goes back to, in school I was, I'd procrastinate on writing papers and stuff. And I'd kind of I'd sit there with a blank page and edit the first sentence 100 times. And I was like, nah, I don't like that. And it's just, the thing that you got to do, it took me forever to sort of really take this to heart, is to just go, express the idea, fix the way you're expressing it later, and go back and I think having internalized that across, all the sort of creative disciplines I work in and everything has been really, really helpful to being able to just sort of, you just got to go, you just got to do it. And then you can't really evaluate it until it exists anyway. So just make it exist and then you can evaluate it.
That's great advice. I have a lot of our scholar gamers in our school district. We have our art. We call it the art, not memes channel. We had to separate the two out because you couldn't put a memes channel with an art channel.
Yeah.
But there's some kids who just over the last 2 years, I know, who have been, I'll say the word brave, to share their artwork and get feedback from other students, which for a lot of kids is a very, I guess, scary thing. And it sounds like, again, with you growing up with a more of a rock background, and again, just experimenting with instrumentation. And it's funny you said that you can't, you can read a little bit of music. If you told me to play a B flat for you, I couldn't tell you what a B flat was, but I could if you showed me the note on a page. I'm like, oh, I know that. That's this fingering here. I can absolutely do that. So it does speak to the how the language of music is very different than reading. It's not like math. It's like you feel it or you can read it. You don't have to know all the nuances and all the parts of music and stuff to make it yours. And I think that's where I think a lot of, as you kind of alluded to, start, get going, get to work on it. Don't obsess over every little bit. And again, as you said, even if it's not perfect out the gate, every lyric's not right or whatever, get something going. Yeah.
And I think it's really powerful to be able to, once something exists, then you can start to analyze it and think about, okay, what don't I like about this? How can I improve that? I don't love the drum sound on this. How can I get these drums to sound like drum sounds that I do like on my favorite records? And how do I, what are the techniques? And then you go and you do some research and you figure it out and you experiment and you get some plugins, whatever you're doing, and it's just a kind of a constant process of trying to tweak and adjust and figure out how to make something that sounds as cool to you as your favorite stuff, is sort of for me, that's kind of how I like to operate. It's like, how can I evoke that goosebumps feeling I get when I listen to this one Bjork song or whatever? Like, how can I do that?
Well, and I think that speaks to I like how you talk about that, because I'm going to ask you about your influences. Mm-hmm. Again, where we grew up, we had amazing access to music that I think that we didn't even realize how good it was. I mean, the Shoreline Amphitheater, which is now where Google headquarters practically is, had some of the biggest acts come through every year. My radio station, I don't know what you listened to growing up. I listened to Live 105 like constantly. That was my number one station. But also like the hip hop genre was huge. I like, Digital Underground. I mean, oh my God, MC Hammer. I mean, if you were living in the Bay Area in the late 80s, early 90s, and you didn't have an MC Hammer job, well, he just overlooked you apparently because he gave everybody else a job in the Bay Area. What was
I had some Hammer pants when I was, I believe. I think I was pretty young when that happened. I must have been like 8 or something when Hammer was doing his thing.
That was your wheelhouse. You probably went and saw Addams Family too. I'll bet you.
I definitely did. Yeah.
Yeah, but who are some of your influence, or what? It doesn't necessarily have to be musical. Maybe it was, like I said, a radio station or an author or something. Who are some of your influences that help to like bring you where you're at with your work right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bands in particular that I love growing up, and I'm always sort of looking to expand what I listen to. But growing up, I listened to a lot of the Beatles and They Might Be Giants and the first couple of Weezer albums, and Bjork and Nada Surf and all sorts of stuff, Imogen Heap, and all sorts of stuff. Radiohead is a really big one for me, and Led Zeppelin, and on and on, the Pixies and so forth. But yeah, I mean, I've I had like I knew what I liked, and I for a while was like real, that teenage thing where you're like, I don't like any of that other stuff. I only like this, But eventually I sort of expanded I was able to sort of find things to appreciate about a wider range of things. But for a while I was pretty like, I don't know, thought about a lot of different stuff and sort of pop music. And I've like come to terms with pop music and the things that are that I like about it. And as an adult, I've sort of backed off my hardline stance about what I think is good and what I don't,
I love that you brought up They Might Be Giants, because there's a band I think that has taken has had an incredibly unique career. They were very much the alternative rock genre of the 80s and 90s. But then all of a sudden I'm an adult and I don't know if you have kids. I have 3 kids. And all of a sudden I'm listening to Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and I'm like, wait a second, I know that voice. Why do I?
Might Be Giants. Yeah.
That's might be. They're singing the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse song. And then they've got their 1, 2, 3 ABC, their science album. I'm like, this is brilliant. Yeah. Not only are they finding a market for kids albums, which, oh my gosh, how smart is that? Yep. But they're introducing kids to their music and getting them familiar with their voice at a very young age. Yep. It almost, that, and again, putting it into comics and cartoons, there seems to be like, that could be like a crossover idea even for game developers when it comes to music, because some of these games, like the Mario theme, is something that kids hear and they just go, I know what that is. Do you find that as well too, or are there songs or games that you think back to and go, oh, I remember that, and now I'm that has helped influence me as well too?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there were some things that I experienced as a little kid that made a big impact on me. One of the most impactful games musically, actually, for me as a kid was Marble Madness for the NES. Do you remember that game?
Yes.
Marble Madness. And it was specifically the NES version. I just thought the score for that was so weird and cool and just like, what is this? I mean, the whole aesthetic of that game is crazy because, it's like an isometric, like MC Escher thing where you're a marble, It's super weird for Nintendo and everything's a side scroller, or extremely 2D. This at least had these sort of illusion of 3D, and it was really interesting. And I played the heck out of that game and loved it. And that soundtrack really kind of blew me away. And also Bionic Commando, I thought had a really, really great soundtrack for the NES. And then, a few years later, Dungeon Keeper. The original Dungeon Keeper was made by Bullfrog, and it's a PC game where you sort of you build a dungeon. You're the bad guys. The tagline for the game is "Evil is good," and you sort of build a dungeon, and the whole point of it is to like defend against the heroes when they come and try to invade your dungeon and kill you. But the score for that game really made an impression on me because it was a CD-ROM, and the first track is the game, and like the other 8 tracks are all the music, back in the day. And I burned that CD and I put it in my car and listened to it. But the music for that game is like half sound design, half score. And it kind of weaves in and out from like creepy ambient sound design into like weird industrial music that's like eccentric, and then back into the sound design. It's very, very cool. And it's just so evocative tonally, and such a really wonderful, it is responsible for a lot of the feel of that game, in my opinion. And that game has such a wonderful feel and is so cohesive, tonally speaking. Really cool game. I recommend checking it out. It's really dated at this point, visually speaking, but it's super fun.
It's amazing how, again, just like how smells bring up ideas, and visuals sometimes do as well too. Yeah. Names to me don't bring up nearly as many ideas, but the sounds and the smells are the things that get me every time. Yeah. And especially when it comes to video games, even if it's just an 8-bit game or a 16-bit game or something, you hear, like I said, that Super Mario Brothers sound. You know what it is. Final Fantasy VII, before the remake and everything. Yeah. The original Final Fantasy VII, you hear that music and just how these musicians had to work with these amazing constraints, and they couldn't use, all the musical, score or a selection of instruments that they wanted to, what they could put together with just this very simple computer MIDI, system. It's amazing how those things evoke such memories.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some of the tools as you're developing, going again from Bastion being the first game till Hades now? Mm-hmm. What have been some of the key tools that you have used to help you design the music for these games?
Yeah, so I do all of my music production in Logic Pro. I think it's a really powerful, awesome piece of software, and I've sort of dabbled in a bunch of different recording softwares over the years, and that one is just kind of, it just works for the way that I like to work the best. It kind of comes out of the box with all the plugins you need, basically, and has a bunch of great synths, and you don't really need to spend a bunch more money on extra plugins to integrate, and it has a lot of great presets. So I've really found that useful in just getting the thing in my head to being a recorded thing I can listen to like really fast, and having the sound I have in mind dialed in just a minute or seconds instead of a couple hours or something it takes to get a guitar sound in a recording studio, miking up an amp and doing the EQ, turn it, futzing with all the knobs forever. So it's just the workflow is so great. Anyway, that's a really useful tool for me. I could go on and on about that. And then for audio integration into the game, we use a middleware called Fmod Studio from Transistor forward. And that's been really powerful in terms of how I've been able to implement the music and the audio in general. And it's allowed me to experiment with like multi-channel music and sort of turning stems on and off and using markers to advance through a piece, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's allowed me to do a lot more stuff in terms of how I integrate the piece into the game.
And it, as you started to do the work on Hades, because Hades wasn't a game that came out this year. I mean, the early release has been, I believe, 2 years now, right? It's been about 2 years?
Early access launched, 2 years ago, yeah.
And how did you, I guess, get in the mindset? I mean, granted, you're a voice in the game, which is, will help, I guess, tremendously, because now you know the game from inside and out because you have to record all the vocals. But how did you come across, as you called it, Mediterranean prog rock Halloween? How did you even settle on that? I mean, if somebody said to me, okay, start making a game around this Greek theme, I'm going to Greek town in Chicago, and I guess I'll just sit, at the Parthenon for hours and just listen to Kazuki music or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I wanted it takes place in the ancient Greek underworld, so it's sort of vaguely ancient Greece, but it's really a fantasy thing more, you know, because it's using all these this mythology stuff and the Greek gods and the pantheon and all that stuff, and you're fighting undead and whatever, so, ghosts and things like that. So, I didn't feel the need to have it be like traditional ancient Greek sounding stuff, but I wanted a little bit of that flavor in there. So the Mediterranean, I wanted like a pan-Mediterranean sort of influence, and it's not period accurate to ancient Greece, because it's like an aulos and then a lyre or whatever, and it's not a lot of stuff you can do with those instruments. They're kind of weird, and they have very specific tunings, and so I checked that stuff out, but basically, when I started working on the project, I kind of researched a bunch of instruments and figured out which ones I could acquire and then sort of reasonably maybe learn to play fairly easily. Anything sort of guitar shaped was the requirement, basically. And so I picked up a bouzouki, a lavta, which is sort of like a Turkish lute with frets, and then a balama, which is like a saz, like a long neck Turkish instrument.
Oh yeah, it looks like a big guitar almost.
It's weirdly shaped.
As we're trying to do this on screen, and people who are listening to this just as a podcast.
It's strangely shaped. It has 3 courses of strings only. It's got like a octave doubled and then a low high high. The third course of strings has 3 strings on it. So it sort of sounds like almost like a mix between a sitar and a 12-string guitar or something, or I don't know. And it's got kind of a interesting sound. And the strings are pretty loose, so it's got like not a lot of sustain. It's got like an interesting kind of percussive vibe. And so anyway, I got those instruments and just sort of started messing around and going to town, and that for me was sort of one aspect of the sound. At a certain point, we decided that the game was going to take place in the Greek underworld, and I knew, well, if the game takes place in hell, I got to have some metal.
Yes,
because it comes from hell, and so I got to have some rock and roll in there. And I figured, something with interesting, strange time signatures that feels the most unsettling. So bringing some of that stuff in there was something that I wanted to do. And I also later realized that a lot of different types of folk music have weird time signatures in them too, which is sort of a connection point between those two things, and a way that I could play those against each other or juxtapose those things. And then, the Halloween music part, I wanted to express the tone of the game, like another aspect of the tone of the game in the music, which is, even though it's sort of kind of like it could potentially be a pretty somber, dark setting, the tone of the game is actually pretty light and fun and kind of quirky, and I wanted to express some of that quirk. So there's like a sort of faux spooky Halloween music element, which is the thing. It's kind of like a theremin type sound that I a
lot of minor chords in that whole thing.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Definitely a lot of minor stuff, and for the for me, the Halloween music aspect of it is represented specifically by the theremin sound, which expresses kind of very quickly, is like a shorthand for some of the lightness that the game has.
I also love to and I don't know how this works. Maybe you can brief. I don't know if this is a huge how the heck does this happen, but I'll find myself, because I still don't care about dungeon runs, and I'm going to ask you about your escape time here in just a second here, because the best I can do is 24 minutes so far. But you finish a dungeon room. I forgot what we call them.
Chamber.
Chamber. Thank you. Yeah. And you get this low bass line.
Yeah.
And I'll just hang out and listen to the bass line.
Yeah.
I love a good bass line. I was a tuba player, so I always listen for the bass line. And the fact that I can just hang out and just go like, oh yeah, just this, my heart rate is still going, right? I need to come down before I go to the next chamber. That's brilliant. But again, as we were talking earlier, about how movies and video games are a little different. how the heck does one even program that to happen where it just so seamlessly, just all of a sudden you end it and it just calms down to this subtle bass line?
Yeah, well, that's all the Fmod integration stuff. That's dynamic music at work, So the way I have that implemented is I have 3 different tracks, stems in Fmod that are sort of playing simultaneously, sort of like you would have in a DAW, right? In Pro Tools or Logic or whatever, you have 3 tracks playing simultaneously, and then you're just hearing the stereo mix of all 3 of those tracks. And we can control through script. You control the volumes of those 3 tracks independently, and so it's a simple like when combat's over, turn off the stuff that isn't the bass. Turn off the drums, and then we also have another sort of system in place where each chamber it'll play some randomized combination of either drums, bass, and guitars, drums and bass, or just drums. And so it has these 3 combinations of things it can do when you start the fight, and then when the fight ends, it'll just turn off the drums based on whatever arrangement of stems is playing. So yeah, it's part of that was to address the question of how do you extend the life of the music for a game you expect people to play for potentially hundreds of hours. I mean, they're going to recurse through the same content over and over and over again.
I'm about 100 hours in right now myself.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have a job, I'd be 200 hours in right now.
Exactly. And so how do you keep the music fresh? And through some experimentation, I sort of theorized that you could keep, one of the ways you can keep the music fresh is by changing the way in which people hear the music constantly. And so that you're not really just listening to the same piece of music over and over. It's really kind of tailored. It's random, semi-randomized, and then also tailored to your experience. How quickly you advance through the chambers determines when it moves to the next section of the piece, and so on and so forth.
I do love too that I was able to reach out to you on Twitter, because I think a while ago I had quite, as the digital copyright Millennium Act stuff was starting to percolate. Obviously, the game's soundtrack is available on Spotify, wherever you want to listen to your music. Yep. And there was the very serious question about, well, if I'm playing this game, which has this amazing soundtrack, and I would love to lead into this podcast episode. Normally I have like a little, 8-bit sounding song. I want to lead in with like the opening song to the game. Yeah. You're very open about like, hey, if you're playing the game, and it's our music. Yeah, absolutely. Don't mute the music. Okay, yeah. Even though you can get the game on Spotify, that you realize that there is a community of people who want to support this game. Supergiant has been, even as you're looking at. I was reading up on the website about how fan art or fan creations can be, as long as it's not official. You're not selling official gear. Yeah. But I go on to Reddit and I see some amazing fan art. Around this game, and again, the creations are. Have you had anybody who's done like, I don't know, fan music? Like, have you had musicians who reach out to you who are like, golly, I really want to get in and work with you, kind of thing?
Sure, yeah. There's been fan music. Some of my favorite stuff is when people get tattoos, like of the game's art. That's amazing. That's my favorite thing, because that's pretty much the ultimate. Like, well, you can't undo that, That's pretty much you're all in. Get a tattoo. So yeah, that stuff's always really incredible to see. The fan art is awesome, and the cosplay and it's amazing.
And where, because you did again the voice of Skelly and the voice of Zagreus. Am I missing any voices?
No, I do some enemy stuff, but those are the only characters I do in this game. Yeah.
So how the heck did you even? I mean, first of all, why is it a British accent?
Yeah. So we when we were thinking about how we wanted the characters to sound, we were thinking about. We wanted to lean into people's sort of what they instantly think about when they think about portrayals of, Greek gods and stuff in media. It's like mostly what I think about is like, Clash of the Titans and all these older movies where it's like all these proper British the gods are sort of proper and British essentially in a lot of those classic portrayals of the Greek gods. Right. And, we're not having them speaking Greek. So, it's sort of it's a way to have them sound different from some of the other characters and to somehow to have them to give them a little bit more cred, I guess, is sort of one way to go about it. And we have a sort of division is that the characters that are sort of the underworld don't have an American accent, and the characters that are not, that are either former Greeks or the gods themselves that have this sort of British accent. And we went for sort of like a pan British, like Western fantasy British accent, like
Gotcha.
Lord of the Rings was sort of our approach, because we didn't want it to be too like regionally specific, and there's variation between characters depending on their vibe and everything.
Yeah, it again, it's a beautifully crafted thing. Did you have to try out the voices first? Did you have a few choices, or did somebody hear you say it and you go, okay, that's it, that's the voice?
So I mean, my characters that I ended up doing were just scratch first, and where we recorded them and put them in the game, and while we were developing it, and we had auditions for those characters and stuff. But the ones that I ended up doing, the team just sort of liked the versions that we had better than any of the auditions that we got. And so I just wound up doing them. That's how it worked.
Because I interviewed Tim Kitzrow, who was the voice of NBA Jam recently, and he's got a very iconic voice. The boom. Oh wait, hold on.
Boom,
I can just. Well, here I've got it just like this. This is how I've got it. Like,
he's on fire. Get that out of here! From the Waffle House, located just off the Beltway.
Okay, He talked about, though, when he did NBA Jam, it was like, okay, just read this. And then it was, Tim gets to write for the next version,
Amazing.
Did you get any input, or did you just, as you're cutting up scenes, you're just like, hey, I'm just going to go off script here and maybe say a few silly things,
It's interesting because Greg, our writer, Greg Kasavin, our writer and creative director, he always said, if you want to improvise, do additional takes or something, feel free. But just the way that the recording happened and the way that the script was formatted, I ended up just not really wanting to do that usually, just because the material was good and it would sort of throw a wrench in the process a little bit, just the way we work. But I certainly would message Greg like, hey, we should have a line like this. Like, I was just thinking, it would be fun if Zach said something like that. And then he'd work it up and do it, and put in the like official version of it into the script later for recording later. And so we certainly did a lot of that. And occasionally I'd throw him like, we should have an exchange about, fishing with your dad or whatever, something ridiculous. We got to have like fishing with dad, or some other, Skelly's got to have this kind of a line, stuff like that.
It felt like the fishing was just kind of thrown in as like a, almost like a joke. Yeah. Like, there's all these rivers, we might as well just throw fishing in as just for fun kind of thing. It doesn't feel like it was actually integral to the game, and you could play the whole game and not fish.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you wanted
it's
to.
Fully optional. Yeah. It's just a way to get some extra resources,
Right. And about how much time, again, for the kids or teachers who are wanting to help, message this appropriately. About how many hours did you put in music-wise, and about how many hours are we talking for voice acting, recording, that kind of stuff? Are we talking? Is this like a process where you never wanted to, like the voice acting part? I imagine it's not music. Is that something where you just went, God, I never want to do this again, or is it something you're like, this is a really cool process?
It was all a lot of fun. I mean, it was just, the way we worked on this stuff was more of a, it was a bit of a marathon where. But we managed to sort of spread it out pretty evenly over the course of the 3 or so years of development that the project took. And it was, it wasn't brutal or anything. We had some periods where it was tighter and I wanted to get some more stuff done before our next update and things like that. But in general, I would say the project was split fairly evenly between my work doing music, doing voiceover recording and directing, and sound design stuff and mixing and things like that. So maybe with like maybe the most time on this project might have been voiceover recording potentially.
Okay.
I don't know. It's pretty close. I bet it's close. So it's, it's sort of about a full year of work on each of those things, more or less.
Oh my gosh.
Divided up between 3 years. Yeah.
All right. Very big question because my friend Danielle Johnson, who I do the Esports EDU chats with on Thursday nights on the same channel, I got her convinced to play this game, and she absolutely just loves this game. And she messaged me and she says, I hear Darren has a ridiculously fast escape time. Like a 12-minute escape time. Is that true?
Yeah, it's about 12 minutes is my best. I've been trying to do it. I can't. I broke 12 one time, but I can't do it again. I think it might have been like I was playing an OP, before a patch or something. I was playing like, but no, like retail right now. I think my best time is like 12:20 maybe.
How long have you been playing? But you've been playing this game since early access, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better.
Oh yeah. I've been playing it a bunch since. I mean, I probably haven't played it as much as now. There are people who've played it more than I have, but before it came out, I'd played it more than most people had played it probably. But now there's like a whole speedrunning community. I was on Friday. I was I commentated on the Hermes Cup, which is like a speedrunning event that they do. And people, the world record, I think, to finish is like 6 or 7 minutes or something of in-game time.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, okay, and this is with no of the burn. What do we call them? After you complete the game 5 times.
So sometimes it is with heat because if you turn on forced overtime, it actually speeds up how quickly the enemies spawn in, like by 20 or 40%. So you can actually kill them faster and clear the rooms more quickly. So there's all sorts of high level, and then if you turn on extreme measures 2. Like up to level 2, the Hydra heads are grouped more closely together, so you can like wreck them more quickly. So there's all sorts of pro stuff that speedrunners do. I mean, it's crazy to me. And there's I just saw like there's a fresh file speedrun somebody did, meaning you start the game and then beat it on your first try. And that was 25 minutes, from with no power, no aid, there's all this stuff you're missing, no death defiance, no.
Yeah. And I tried that because I bought it for the Switch as well. Yeah. I'm like, I can't be at my PC all the time. Yeah. So I'm sitting at my Switch, and of course after you're playing on PC and then you switch to a new platform and it's all brand new, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so slow and this sword is so terrible and why is this taking forever? Yeah, I get that completely. I'm hopeful because I've seen it in the Switch version that it looks like eventually hopefully we can grab my.
We released cross saves. It exists now.
Oh my god! Oh, I know what I'm doing after this.
Yeah. You just gotta connect it to your Steam or Epic accounts, and you'll have your save.
Oh, I'm so excited! This is fantastic. You just made my Christmas. So, just a final bit. Obviously you've won. IGN named you guys Game of the Year. Yeah. Polygon named you Game of the Year. Yeah. The Game Awards gave you Action Game of the Year, and there was one Indie Game. Yeah. Right. Since all these accolades have come out, I imagine that there are people who are contacting the company, saying, "Boy, you're hot here. Can we?" What's been, I guess, like the biggest fanboy experience you've had so far of somebody maybe who reached out to you at this point?
Gosh, it's interesting. The coolest stuff I've seen isn't people reaching out, but it's like some tweet somebody will do. Like it was like some major. I forget who it was. It was like some big political analyst or somebody on election day was like, here's what I'm doing today. I'm like pacing, chewing my fingernails, playing Hades, doing this. I'm like, seeing stuff like that. Like my nephew sent it to me. I was like, oh, dude, okay. And there's like the fact that it bubbled up to the level of sort of broader conversation, not just in video games. It was like we'd never had any of our games do that before, and seeing people saying, oh yeah, my whole Twitter feed is just all people talking about Hades and it's all, and all that kind of stuff. It's like, that's a new thing for us for sure. Stuff like the Washington Post, thing, the articles that they wrote about it. I mean, that's like what we refer to on Team, that the game entered the parentosphere, where it's like a thing your parents will know what it is when you tell them about it. Like, hey, we're watching it, and they'll be like, wow, that's So that kind of stuff has been really cool.
It is actually, you know, I'm 45. I've got 3 kids, and I introduced my kids to Hades. So it was nice to be able to turn around to my 17 and 14 and 12-year-old and be like, try this. You're going to like it. Oh, really, Dad? Yes, really, children. You will like this. Yeah. And you might learn something along the way, because I was a huge Greek mythology nerd as a child. 5th grade was a big one, freshman year of high school especially. Yeah. And I'm reading this, and I'm looking at this going, oh, this is scratching every itch. Yeah. Like the video games, the storyline, the music, like this is just every pleasure center of my brain is being hit at the same time. So thank you for all the work that you've done. One final question, and this is a major one. Again, we're a couple of Bay Area kids. We're Peninsula kids. Well, you're San Jose. I mean, it's fine. Yeah. But where do you go when you're back? Because you're in Berkeley. You live over in Berkeley.
Yeah,
now,
like
right?
East Bay. Yeah, these are all Bay area. Yeah.
But when you're back over on the Peninsula side, where do you go for pizza?
For pizza? Oh gosh.
Or do you?
I mean, on the peninsula?
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't spend a lot of time in the peninsula. I know like South Bay stuff.
Well, that's what I'm talking. I mean down San Jose area, up and down the
I didn't have a pizza place that I thought was very good, like until I still don't know of a great pizza place in the South Bay. I'm sure there is one now, but I didn't grow up with great pizza. Like my favorite stuff's like Falafel Drive-In in San Jose. That place is one of my favorite places. I think it's like, and it's been there for years, and it's one of the best food things in San Jose as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it's funny. A lot of people don't realize this, and you might remember this. You were maybe a little young. I took classes at San Jose State in 1992. I think the summer of 92. And oh my God, downtown San Jose before the .com boom was a demilitarized zone. Yeah,
it was not a lot of stuff going on there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think after they filmed Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, it was like left half destroyed, and then eventually you get the Sharks came in and built their arena, and that kind of rebuilt the area.
Yeah, I remember all that. Yeah, I mean I was young, but I remember all that stuff, and I used to do San Jose Children's Musical Theater. Over sort of in downtown area, and like I just remember, I mean I was a kid, so my parents would drive me through and I'd be like, what is this place? What is this area? Like we were rehearsing in some warehouse, some dilapidated warehouse or something. Yeah.
I remember my aunt and uncle took my sister and I to a computer animation festival at this old movie house in downtown San Jose. I mean, it was like roll up the windows, don't make any eye contact with anybody. We're just going in here. We're going to watch it. And it's where I saw the first. I saw the Pixar movie with the light bouncing on the ball. I remember that vividly. I must have been about 10 years old, 11 years old, something like that. Yeah, it's so funny just how the Bay Area has changed so much in 20, 30 years, especially just because of all the things that have happened. I drive by my old high school and I'm like, I've never seen that type of BMW before or Mercedes. Where do they get this money? But my pizza place is Amici's.
Amici's, okay.
Cool.
I vaguely remember that. There's a place I used to like Pizza and Pipes. Actually, I think it's gone now.
Yes, in Daly City. Yeah, Pizza and Pipes.
There was another one in San Jose.
Oh,
there was one on Winchester, I think, and it was called like Angelino's Pizza and Pipes or something like that. And they had like a giant pipe organ around the whole place, and a guy would come in and like do all the bells and whistles and play Star Wars or whatever on the thing. Yeah, that place was fun.
How many times did you do the Winchester Mystery House tour?
Only a handful. I mean, I did it like...
But more than once.
Yeah, I did it more than once for sure. I did it as like a little kid, and then I did it again maybe as like a teenager, and then like one other time. And I think I had a buddy there who like parked cars over the summer or something. He was like, or like didn't park, he directed the parking lot over the summer.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, if you ever get the chance, it is actually kind of an interesting tour, even if you like Victorian style homes, that kind of thing. It's weird. It's very weird, but you might enjoy, because the whole Bay Area is weird. Yeah. So Darren Korb, again, voice of Zagreus, voice of Skelly, IGN, Polygon, 2020 Game of the Year, and musical composer. I'm sure those awards will be coming soon, because again, as I told you before we started this, I got my Spotify 2020 review, and a lot of the Hades songs made my top list in my 2020 review. Wow. Darren Korb, thank you for being so giving of your time and being a guest on the Academy of Esports podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan.
Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.